Good morning, pot pickers, and welcome to Crapper. In a previous video, I pondered the question as to what is the greatest Irish band of all time. I concluded that Thin Lizzy could be a possible candidate, but I also mentioned Planxty, who are a stunningly good band and one of my faves from the island of Ireland. And I thought I'd talk about them today. They're a folk band, really, Planxty. But yes, it's someone once described them to me as like progressive folk, in the sense that, you know, if you like sort of slightly experimental, programmatically orientated music, you know, with good tunes and good narratives, they might be for you. And so I would recommended them wholeheartedly. Today I'm going to talk about their first album, Planxty. So it's Planxty by Planxty. The first album by Planxty, called Planxty. Who are they? Well, we've got Christy Moore on vocals and guitar. Actually, they're all multi-instrumentalists, so this is going to be slightly fruitless, this run through. But yeah, Andy Irwin, vocals and guitar, various other things, mandolin, bouzouki. We'll come back to that in a second. We've got Donald Lunny on guitar and bouzouki, so on. And then Liam O'Flynn plays the Ilian pipes, the Irish pipes, they're sometimes called. And I believe recorder, tin whistle as well, so on. An exhaustive list would be difficult here. Vis-a-vis their biography, as I said, we'll start with the first album, but they did 3 albums together in the first instance. Planxty, The Well Below the Valley, and Cold Blow in the Rainy Night, which is actually my favourite. For me, the third one is the favourite. But the first album is also amazing. I mean, those first 3 albums are really definitive. I once saw The Well Below the Valley, the second one, described as the Irish Dark Side of the Moon. So that gives you an idea of what we're dealing with here. Like, these are basically like one of the best, if not the most well thought of Irish bands of all time. They then broke up and had a little break, and then they came back together at the end of the 70s. And they made an album called After the Break, and then another one called The Woman I Love So Well, and then Words and Music, and then they broke up again. Right. Now, vis-a-vis Empirics, this first album, Planxty, was recorded in 1972 and released in 1973. It was recorded in London, and it was released on Polydor. In fact, the band had already sort of like a proto Planxty had already got together the year before this to participate in the recording of, I think, the second solo album by Christy Moore, and they obviously realised they were onto good things, so they decided to, you know, put a band together to join together more, in a more serious way, and you know, to contribute more collectively, as it were. Now, let's go to the tracks here. The first track was actually recorded also for the Christy Moore album. They decided to do it again for this album. I'm glad that they did, because this is the better version, I think. It's called Raggle-Taggle Gypsy, and then it goes into a instrumental piece, a waltz, I think you would say. The title is in Gaelic. It's slightly difficult for me to say because I don't speak Gaelic, but I understand that it's Tia Dontala is the name. Now, so basically we've got 2 tracks in one. This is what I meant by the sort of the more experimental side. But really, I mean, this kind of medley type structure is quite traditional in Irish music, or in folk music in Ireland and in England as well. Raggle-Taggle Gypsy, of course, is a classic folk song. It's one of the child ballads, that's to say, those English or Scottish ballads that were anthologized by the American Francis James Child in the late 19th century. Classic story. It's a classic story. It's also sometimes known as Gypsy Davy or Blackjack Davy. It was recorded also by the Incredible String Band. You might like to check out my colleague Peter's solo episode on the Incredible String Band. That's only available on the podcast. But if you haven't checked out our podcast yet, please do so, because you should enjoy it. It's designed that way. It's designed so that people enjoy it. We hope that they do. And Steel Eye Span also did a version of this track, Blackjack Davy. Which I think it's a different tune, but it's kind of the same story, basically. We'll come back to Steel Eye Span another day, by the way, because I think me and Sean are going to do an episode on. What is the story? Well, the lady of the manor leaves the lord and goes off with the travelling folk, basically. She says, memorably, "I'd rather a kiss from the yellow gypsy's lips than all the cash and money-o." Which doesn't sound very politically correct. But, of course, Gypsy is having the last laugh here. Although in some versions of the story he's hanged at the end, which seems more like it might be a more authentic ending, more closer to what would have happened in reality. It's a mythological story, of course, and the kind of mythological story that it recurs throughout history, which is the nature of mythological stories. Basically, the idea is that love overcomes social position or rank, Romeo and Juliet is probably the most famous version of that story. This is supposed to be a comic version, in the sense that it ends well for the gypsy and the lady, not so much for the lord, but, he's got his money to comfort him, hasn't he? The old git. All right, good. Now, talk about the music here. We mentioned, favourite Irish bands. Another big Irish band that's been in the news recently is Kneecap. They're from the north, actually, but not that they would perhaps recognise the difference, because I think that they're Republicans. Now, Kneecap are rappers. You remember the rappers? You know the rappers. Now, the reason why I mention this is because what I think is interesting about this track, Raggle-Taggle Gypsy, is that Christy Moore, I would say, is actually rapping on this track. He's saying, when the money, he's adding extra syllables. That was a bad example. He's adding in extra syllables in order to keep the sort of urgency of the rhythm, right? There was maybe no ladies. That was a slightly better example, but still a bit vague. And yes, so I think that this is a really nice, interesting technique. And I think it's sort of mirrored in the arrangement of the track. They're playing it very tight, this piece, like in quavers, do they call it? It's much more, and so this arrangement is, I think, is much more sort of dramatically strident and rhythmic than, for example, the version on the Christy Moore album. And I think this is important because it gives a sense of the urgency of the passion that the lady of the manor is feeling for her gypsy lover. So it's about that excitement about the love relationship, but it's also in a minor. It's actually in a minor key, this track, which I think is also significant because it makes you realise the sort of jeopardy that's incurred in this, rampant and illegal passion that they're sharing. In fact, the reason why I say this is comic is because it has a happy ending. I think the happy ending is represented here by the medley into the instrumental passage, which is, as I say, is led on the Ilian pipes by Liam O'Flynn. Right, Tier Dontola, I think it's pronounced, because this bit is in a major key. Right, now, the only problem I have with this medley, I don't have a problem with medleys, but in this context. But the problem I have is that I think that the ending is sort of incongruous, both dramatically and musically. The happy ending is dramatically sort of questionable, I would say, and I don't think it quite works musically. And so I think the first half of this track is awesome, but I think when they go into the instrumental part, I think they've slightly thrown it away. It doesn't really matter because the rest of the album's so great. But this is perhaps one of those examples of an album that's led by a song that's not necessarily the strongest. But as I say, mainly because of the medley, because they could have just stopped at the end of the Raggle-Taggle Gypsy, basically. They slam into a new key here, which I think is slightly uncomfortable. And as I say, it sort of undermines the jeopardy of the original track. So I'm always slightly disappointed by this ending. Apart from that, this is an awesome, beautiful number. And as I say, shout out to Christy Moore's amazing vocals, which you're already made aware of, this early on the album. He sounds amazing, Christy Moore, I think. He sort of vocalizes how I imagine like an agricultural worker in the 17th century would vocalize. And it's one of them, the most sort of notable things about Planxty, I think, alongside perhaps the Ilian pipe playing. And, this sort of quite comradely arrangements. I say comradely purposefully because they are a very left-wing band. And, Donald Lunny's sort of like structural work, his production work, and also the incredible songwriting skills of Andy Irwin, which I'll come back to, who I think is at the level of writing is a key member here. But anyway, beautiful vocals, beautiful track. Track 2 is called Arthur McBride. Now this song is bloody hilarious, I think. It's really a dark comedy. It's actually an anti-war song. But, it's sort of, it was obviously written long before the hippie movement came along. And, instead of saying, no more war, it says war is just daft. War is stupid, to paraphrase Culture Club. In fact, war is so stupid that we're just going to make fun of it, right? And so what the story here is that the narrator and his cousin, Arthur McBride, right, the titular Arthur McBride, are drunk and they're crashed out on a beach somewhere. And a couple of senior officers from the local military garrison come along, accompanied by a drummer boy, and they encourage them to enlist in the army, the two lads, the narrator and his cousin, Arthur McBride. And they sort of talk about all the advantages they'll have if they join the army. And Arthur and the narrator just take the piss out of them. And then when they're challenged, they basically get into a fight. And then the whole of the rest of the song is them describing the fight, which makes me laugh. They sort of, Arthur and his cousin, the narrator, beat up the soldiers, and they kick the drum into the sea, which is a hilarious punchline. I've got the line here. As for the wee drummer, we rifled his pouch, and we made a football of his rowdy dow, and into the ocean to rock and to roll, and bade it a tedious returning, which is a great folk line. This is a waltz, this one, in a major key, so it's a sort of happy-ish number, and it's sort of good-hearted, I think, this number, even though it's basically just a description of a scene of violence. And I think the fact that it's in a waltz perhaps is kind of programmatically interesting. It's almost, because a waltz is a dance, right? So it's almost like they're saying, let's choreograph this punch-up. This is a choreographed punch-up, Now, Andy Irwin sings this one. So you've got a new voice coming in at this point in the album. It's good. Andy Irwin is a brilliant singer. But I should say that I think there's a better version of this on the album that Andy Irwin's version. On the version I like more is the version that's on the album by Andy Irwin with Paul Brady, which they do as a double act after Planxty breaks up, because Paul Brady was like a a late addition to the Planxty lineup just before they broke up. I think he was supposed to sort of replace Christy Moore. He's a great artist, Paul Brady, but he couldn't save Planxty at that point. However, the album he makes with Andy Irwin is really, I think of it, as a lot of people do, as a sort of fourth Planxty album, an unofficial fourth Planxty album, because it's that good. It's so good, that album. But I think, as I was saying, I think Paul Brady does a better rendition. He does Arthur McBride again on that fourth album, and I think he does a better rendition. That's not to take anything away from Andy Irwin, really, but I think the Paul Brady version is kind of definitive of this track. It's a bit slower and clearer, so all the jokes are really, like played out for all their worth. Now, track 3, Planxty Irwin is called. This perhaps raises the question as to where the word Planxty comes from. As in the name of the band. I think nobody knows where it comes from because there's lots of theories about where it comes from, but it's the empirical evidence on which they rest is uncertain. Let's say there is a theory that it's a corruption of slancher. I think I'm pronouncing that right, which is the Irish word for good health. They say when they're drinking, like the Irish version of cheers, as we would say in England. But the reason why people say that is because Planxty is supposed to be apparently a celebration of something. So Planxty Irwin, for example, would be a celebration of someone called Irwin, right? A tribute to somebody. But who knows? Now this track 3, is the first Uilleann Pipes led solo. The tune was apparently written by Turlough O'Carolan, who is sometimes described as Ireland's national composer. He was blind. He played the Celtic harp, which you may recognise from your Guinness logos, right? Kind of national instrument there. O'Carolan wrote about 200 songs, and I think that they survived due to this sort of strong oral tradition of communication in Ireland, which I've discussed before. I mentioned it in my Thin Lizzy episode. This tradition could partly be a question of social class, something to do with, possibly to do with illiteracy, because poor people didn't used to be taught how to read. But it could also, so it's in that sense, as a social question, could also be a political question, because if you don't write things down, you can't get into trouble. Plus, people have to meet up in pubs to do politics, don't they? Right. Anyway, it's a nice tune, this. But, I think for me it's something of an interlude. I think it depends on people's taste, really. It depends how much you like the Uilleann Pipes. In any case, it only lasts a couple of minutes. Uilleann, by the way, means elbow, apparently, in Gaelic. And it's because the pipes are powered by a bag that's inflated by moving the elbow like this. Unlike the Scottish bagpipes, which require blowing. It's a similar instrument, but they require blowing into the bag. So it's the pipes operated by the elbow is the Uilleann Pipes. Maybe that's where elbow got their name from. No. Okay. What else? So I think that yes. So this is, as I say, something of an interlude. But it's a very pleasant interlude. But it doesn't. There's not a lot riding on it in terms of the album. However, I think it shows us immediately that we're getting a program here, and that will become more important as the album goes on, I should say. This, as I say, this was where the crossover with like progressive rock in a way, because the programmatic nature of the records is reminiscent of prog rock. Reminiscent of prog rock, avant la lettre. Can something be reminiscent of something avant la lettre? Anyway, I don't know. Okay, good. Track 4. Sweet Thames Flow Softly. Perhaps I should say Sweet Thames Flow Softly, because that's how it's pronounced in the song, which I love. I love the fact that it's mispronounced, because it's a sort of subaltern habit that I think It's the subaltern position of the immigrant to the imperial centre, and they invent their own language, their own way of speaking, even in the heart of the empire. I think that's why I like it. This is the first ballad on the album. Beautiful ballad, written by Ewan MacColl, Kirsty MacColl's dad, if you're up on these things. Ewan MacColl was a very famous communist British singer-songwriter who wrote lots of famous songs. For example, First Time Ever I Saw Your Face, which was later recorded in jazz idiom, I suppose, by Roberta Flack. He also collected a lot of songs. Scarborough Fair, the famous Simon and Garfunkel track. And, this association with Ewan MacColl, again, reminds us that Planxty is a political band, let's say, socialist Republican band. Very much of the era and the place in that sense. Because, why wouldn't, if you're Irish, why wouldn't you be anti-imperialist? Again, this is sung by Christy Moore, the irreplaceable Christy Moore, this number. And it's basically a devoted love song, this one. But it's very heartfelt, but also light-hearted, if that's not a paradox. And occasionally, sort of funny, really, in places. Slightly funny, but pathetic. He sings, "Kissed her once again at Wapping. After that, there was no stopping." Love it. Okay, track 5. It's called Junior Crean's favourite, Corney is Coming. This is a medley of reels. Although, aren't all reels medleys? I don't know. Someone will tell me. Reels, as people may know or not know, are dance tunes, and they're played in straight time, simple time as opposed to compound time, as I understand it, with the emphasis on the first and the third beats. So really this is a dance interlude again. So we've had this sort of contemplative love song, now we're going to have a little dance. As I say, a lot of this is like a throwback to previous eras where an evening's entertainment involved listening to some minstrels doing their thing, but it's also got fits into a certain idiom at the start of the 1970s in Irish and British music more generally. There's a sort of almost like a theatrical element to the way that this is all programmed, I think. Now let's go on to track 6. I guess this is the final track on side 1. This is called The West Coast of Clare. This is a very important track, I think. This is my favourite track on the album. It's about the end of a relationship. So it's a melancholy tune, sung in a melancholy style, very moving. I mean, actually, it's sort of heartbreaking, really, this song. It's called The West Coast of Clare, which of course is a place, Clare. But it occurred to me that it's also a girl's name, Claire. And I don't know if this is intentional, but it could be a sort of unconscious connection. Now, the reason why I love this song is not just that it's a great track, but it's also one of Andy Irwin's original compositions. He usually contributed one such composition to each Planxty album, and there's also one on the Andy Irwin Paul Brady album, which provides a continuity between that and the previous trilogy, Planxty trilogy, as I mentioned earlier. Another point of comparison between them. But Andy Irwin, I think, is an amazing songwriter. One of my favourite songwriters of all time. He does a lot of covers and things, and traditional songs. But I think the way I think about his songwriting is that it's like an outgrowth of a sort of age-old popular tradition. And I think his songs live up to that tradition and continue it. I mean, I just love them, and I think his solo albums really are among the best of any singer-songwriter in the islands. If Planxty is like one of the greatest bands from the islands, of all time. I think Andy Irwin is a candidate for the best singer-songwriter from the islands of all time. And a couple of albums of his that I would recommend to listeners, if they're at all interested, are Rude Awakenings. That's a weird title for an album. But it's an amazing record. And the other one I really love is Way Over Yonder. You know, if thou hast not heard them, thou shouldst. You will not regret it, I promise. Those are two amazing albums. He did other really great albums, but those are my two favourites, I think. They're completely brilliant, those records, I think. Anyway, enough of that. Let's go on to what I presume is side 2. Begins with the track The Jolly Beggar, and then goes into a reel, which I believe is called The Wise Maid. So again, dealing with another medley here, and this, which thus mirroring, the opening of side 1, a song, then a reel. Although this time the reel has the same time signature and feel as the song. The reel is The Wise Maid, and the song sung by Andy Irwin is The Jolly Beggar. Now, what's the story here? Well, The Jolly Beggar is the story of a beggar who comes begging at a house, and the farmer's daughter lets him in because she thinks he's good looking. And then he sleeps over, and then she goes to him in the night, happens to pass by, and she sees him naked, and they have sex. And he takes her maidenhead, as they used to say. And then she says, I had sex with you because I realised that you're not really a beggar, are you? You're a lord. Go on, you can tell me the truth. And he says, well, that's interesting. Actually, I'm a beggar. But thanks for the compliment. So she kicks him out. But the punchline, of course, is that he was actually a nobleman. He just didn't want her to know. So he didn't have to deal with all the implications of what he was doing. So, it's a happy story, this one. It's a story about the female fantasy, really, and of how men relate to it, which, again, is classic and mythological, really, because it transcends the historical period, right? It's historical period. Is he jolly because he's nice when he's begging, or is he jolly because he's just had sex with the farmer's daughter? I think it's left open. Also, why is it always the farmer's daughter? Must have been a traditional fantasy, that one. These days it's all nurses, isn't it? At least since the creation of the NHS. It used to be the farmer's daughter. Okay, good. It's usually a psychological reason for these things, but let's not go into it too deeply. Now, this is another child ballad. Highly traditional, this song. From Scotland, this time. And the refrain is, we'll gang nae more a roving. We'll go no more roving. So, apparently also it was the inspiration for a poem by Byron, Lord Byron, about the end of youth, as far as I can make out. I've actually got a note of it here. This is the Byron poem. So we'll go no more roving so late into the night, though the heart be still as loving and the moon be still as bright. For the sword outwears its sheath, and the soul wears out the breast, and the heart must pause to breathe, and love itself have rest. Though the night was made for loving, and the day returned too soon, yet we'll go no more roving by the light of the moon. So, that's sad, isn't it? But good. Sad but good. Sad but true, as Metallica would say. Okay, good. Now, then we go into... what is it? Only Our Rivers, which is another ballad, sung by Christy Moore this time. This is a cover, actually, by one Mickey McConnell. Sort of a political song. The metaphor you can guess from the title, Only Our Rivers Run Free. It's just, the only thing that is free in our land is the water that runs in the rivers, right? I suppose Thames Water might have something to say about that. Of course, it's about Ireland. Irish singer-songwriter composes this one, and here sings it. About Ireland, and of course its troubling relationship with the English. We don't have to get into that here, but Except to say that it's often said that Ireland was the first colony of England and the first to break free from the empire. You know, that's a potted history in one sentence. Anyway, beautiful song this, and perfectly placed on the album. You know, we've got the Jolly Beggar. That's a funny little story, sort of funny in a sort of sardonic way. And then we've got the ballad, the political ballad, very moving. Next track is difficult to pronounce for me because it's Gaelic again. Bheag Mhór, I think it's pronounced. This is an instrumental waltz led by Liam O'Flynn on the pipes. Once again, I can't help but mention the programmatic consistency of all this. It's like we're spending an evening in the theatre with these guys. Perhaps reinforced by the cover, which I haven't mentioned, but the cover is like the 4 troubadours in a row on the stage, or is it 3? Can't quite remember. Can't quite remember who's visible on the cover. I haven't got it to hand. But yeah, this idea that you're spending time in the company of these musicians, I think, is an important motif here. You know. Yeah, so this is a lovely little interlude. As I said before, prog fans might like this kind of programming. This isn't quite prog folk, but it's an attempt to you'd have to go to Steel Ice Band for that. Or maybe Fairport Convention. But it is an attempt to think, this track is, I think, an attempt to think again on a larger scale than just one track, you know, so that makes it kind of sort of, you know, digestible for fans of progressive music. Playing is exquisite here, really, we have to say. I'm not an expert on the pipes, but I think the voicing and the ornamentation is pretty much immaculate here. He's an amazing player, Liam O'Flynn. Sadly now gone too soon. Next track is Follow Me Up To Carlow. Now apparently this is about a battle, the Battle of Glenmalure, which took place in 1580, and it seems like it was the Irish equivalent of 300. I don't know if people have seen that film, you know, like where the 300 Spartans take down the entire Persian army. This battle was the sort of crux, I think, of the Irish rebellions against the English in that century. 2,000 English troops are defeated by 700 Irish fighters. Hence the following lines. See the swords of Glenemail flashing o'er the English pale. See all the children of the Gael beneath O'Byrne's banners. Rooster of a fighting stock, would you let a Saxon cock cry out upon an Irish rock? Fly up and teach him manners. So, you know, this is the sons of Ireland against the Anglo-Saxons, quoth, you know, the Irish themselves. Cue Anglo-Saxon jingle on the podcast. Elizabeth I is invoked. Well, lots of people are invoked in this track. In fact, it's kind of like, you know, a roll call, this track, of people you've never heard of, but were once very important. I think it's a great track, this one. Quite angry. A bit of a sort of stirring call to arms. Quite irresistible. It's one of those tracks that, you know, I'm English, but I think, you know, even if you're English, like, you feel Irish when you listen to this. You feel like you're on the Irish side. You know, like when you watch Braveheart and you want the Scots to beat you, even if you're English. Or, I don't know, you read, like, it's like the other day I read this essay by Michael Oakeshott. I think it's called On Being Conservative, something like that. And it's kind of a philosophical defense of conservatism. And what I thought about it was that it's so well written that at the end of it, you kind of feel like, yeah, I'm a conservative as well, even if you're not, you know. So, this is the power of, you know, argumentation, isn't it? And, songwriting in this case. It can make you shift sides if it's good enough. Anyway, if it's convincing enough. So, this takes us into the penultimate track, Merrily Kiss the Quaker, which is a final little, as I say, penultimate instrumental piece. Pipe-led again, but actually the whole band is involved in the arrangement at this point with their bodhrans. You know that drum that you play like with the thing that's like a pen, I always think. This is a this is called a slide. This one. It's not a waltz or a jig or a reel. It's I think it's the same time signature as a jig, but apparently it's slightly faster and phrased differently. I am most inexpert in this area, but anyway. It's a very nice track, this one. I like it. And I find it a little breather, nice breather after the intensity of the previous track. Again, we've got this dialectic between, sort of substantial, thematic songs and then the sort of instrumental interludes. But on that note, let's get into the big ending to the album, which is the Blacksmith, right? Now, this is a very famous and important English folk song, apparently transcribed by the classical composer Ralph Vaughan Williams, at the beginning of the 20th century. Now, there's lots of versions of this track in existence, like recorded versions. Planxty did it, of course, as you will have deduced from the fact that I'm discussing it presently. But Pentangle as well did a version. We should do an episode on Pentangle as well on this channel. Watch this space. Steel Eye Span did it twice. Once on the first album, which I think is really the definitive version, Steel Eye version. But they did it again on the second album, presumably because they wanted to do a worse version on the second album. But yeah, lots of people have done it. Linda Ronstadt even did a version of this track. Now, this story is a tragedy, structurally speaking. So perhaps it's a good ending to the album. It's not exactly downbeat, but it's very dramatic, and a very dramatic end, I would say. What's the story? Well, the story's told by a woman. And it's about a blacksmith who won her heart and made her fall in love with him, like sort of convinced her to fall in love with him, and then disappeared. And word comes back to her at some point that he's actually got married to someone else. And the woman wishes them well, but sort of wryly notes that he has abandoned her entirely carelessly, and now she has nothing. So it's a kind of devastating ending. And the final line is presumably voiced by the interlocutor, who notes this sort of dreadful expression on the woman's face as she kind of like brushes off the story's denouement. So this final switch, I think, to the narrator right at the end makes me think that this song has sort of the air of like the Rime of the Ancient Mariner about it. The shocking nature of the story is kind of mediated through the physical effect that it seems to have on the the original narrator, as it were. And actually, there's a again, this is another one of those Planxty tracks that starts with a song and then goes into an instrumental part, an instrumental section at the end, which I think colloquially they call Blacksmithereens, which seems to sort of represent, that title seems to represent the chaos wrought by this terrible story that we're listening to about this poor woman who's been abandoned. The ending is in the same sort of time signature, not time signature, in the same, has the same pulse as the rest of the track. But it's a bit more energetic, and played more energetically and bits fast. So it's got a sense of foreboding about it, and therefore it's kind of continuous with the song's general theme. It's like they're doing a riff on the tragedy itself, if you like. The time signature is not actually the same. It goes into 5/4, from 4/4 into 5/4, which is a kind of lopsided time signature, as musicians will know. So it's not exactly a psychologically natural time signature. It's not danceable, for example. And I think that kind of represents perhaps the kind of uncanny nature of the story. The kind of weirdness in the story is represented in the weirdness of the final time signature. You also get a sense here, I think, of the balance between the mandolin and the bouzouki, which are two instruments that this band are kind of developing. There's kind of a dialectic between Donald Lunny and Andy Irwin at this level, I think. And the bouzouki, I think, was a Greek instrument, kind of Greek quasi-guitar, which was a sort of more common feature of this kind of music that Planxty are playing around this time. But I think it was really Planxty that kind of innovated it, or it was the Planxty set, at least, because I think it was sort of this mandolin bouzouki combination, I think, was developed by a guy called Johnny Moynihan, who was in Sweeney's Men with Andy Irwin before Planxty started. They made one very good album. And he later joined Planxty as well, I think. I think he replaced Donald Lunny at a certain point. So this is a very kind of unusual arrangement here at the end, and it's very representative of the kind of slightly eclectic collection of folk sounds that bands like Planxty were playing with. Andy Irwin had gone to Eastern Europe at one point, the Balkans. I think he probably travelled through Greece as well. I mean, I'm not sure about that, but it's not that far away, is it, geographically? And it had a big influence on his music, and sort of Bulgarian folk music and things like that. It kind of travelled through the communist bloc, basically. And this comes up a lot on his solo albums. But anyway, this is a very sort of good example of it here, this new kind of sound that they're trying to create here at the end of this track and at the end of this album. So yeah, it's extremely sort of dramatic and atmospheric end to the album, this, which to me sort of seems to mirror the story of popular folk music in general. Anyway, on that bombshell, the bombshell of the Blacksmithereens, I think we can leave it. This is a wonderful album. As I said, possibly not Planxty's best, but anyway, paradigmatic, partly because it's the first. and also because of the programming. And, it's full of energy, the record, and full of this sort of, let's say, the popular intellect, right? Channeled through kind of exquisite musical performances. And as I said, prog fans might even like it because it's programmed so carefully, and it balances the songs and the instrumental passages so well. With that, I shall leave you. Please remember to like and subscribe. And if you are on the podcast, please leave us a rating. We would enormously appreciate it. And I'll see you on the next episode of Crapper. And for the moment, I shall simply say, ta-ra!